This is part 9 of my equipment series of videos covering, in this case, German anti-tank guns and how they were organised, as well as the types of guns that are available. I've created these videos in order to assist my efforts in determining what equipment was used when and in what formations. This is a specific issue when creating equipment data charts or organisational tables for the German Army in World War II. The 2.8 cm schwer Panzerboxer Ende Unverfifft, or SPZB 41 or Panzerboxer 41, was a German anti-tank weapon working on the squeeze bore principle. Officially classified as a heavy anti-tank rifle, thus the schwer Panzerboxer, it would be better described and is widely referred to as a light anti-tank gun. The schwer Panzerboxer 41 was used by some motorized divisions and by some Jager or light infantry divisions and mountain divisions and paratrooper units. Some guns were supplied to anti-tank and sapper units. The weapon was employed on the Eastern Front from the beginning of the hostilities, and the Wehrmacht possessed 183 pieces on the 1st of June 1941 until the end of the war, and also saw combat in the North African campaign and on the Western Front in 1944 to 45. The 2.8 cm schwer Panzerboxer 41 Leica Feldlafetta was a variant developed for paratrooper units. It used a lightweight carriage without suspensions. The wheels were replaced by small rollers. The shield was typically removed. In the end, the factor which brought production of the schwer Panzerboxer 41 to a halt was shortage of tungsten. This shows a paratrooper version in 1942. It looks like a substantial weapon in this photo, so I'm surprised the Germans called it an anti-tank rifle. Originally named the 3.0 cm Panzeratv Kanonen L45 or Pak 45 and designed to be towed by horses, it was redesignated the 3.7 cm Panzeratv Kanon 35/36 or Pak 35/36 when it was equipped with rubber tyres, probably in 1934, and first appeared in combat in 1936 during the Spanish Civil War. The Panzeratv Kanonen 35 or Panzeratv Kanonen 35/36 was initially produced in 34 or 35. I'm uncertain how it differed from the Pak 36, the final version of the Pak 36. My assumption is these weapons were the older 3.7 cm Pak L45s, which used solid wheels, which were upgraded by the addition of rubber wheels in 1936, thus its designation 35/36. The Panzeratv Kanonen 36 or Pak 36 was designed to be towed by motor transports and was produced in 1936 with rubber tyres. It was the main German anti-tank gun until 1942 and continued to see service until the end of the war. During the French campaign, it had difficulty with some of the heavier tanks, so in September 1940 it was supplied with APCR ammunition, which increased its maximum penetration significantly. However, by November 1944, this type of ammunition was all but exhausted. One benefit of this weapon was the ease of moving it. This was a light and highly mobile anti-tank gun. However, it lacked the punch necessary later in the war, even when using APCR ammunition. The 4.2 cm Panzeratv Kanonen 41 or Pak 41 was a light anti-tank gun issued to German airborne units in World War II. This gun was externally similar to the 3.7 cm Pak 36, using a modified version of the latter's carriage, but used the squeeze bore principle. Production of the Panzeratv Kanonen 41 was terminated in June 1942 after delivery of 313 guns. By November 1943, only 47 remained in service. I have to assume the lack of tungsten was the main reason production was terminated, as its armour penetration was impressive, even if the range was low. The 4.7 cm Panzeratv Kanonen or Pak 141 F was the German designation for the French 47mm APX anti-tank gun. I'm a bit uncertain of the exact German designation. My primary sources indicates this is a Pak 141, which was based on the model 1937, yet Wiki indicates the name was 4.7 cm Pak 181 for the model 1937, and 4.7cm Pak 183 for the model 1939. According to Wiki, the guns were used in the Atlantic Wall fortification, so may never have been issued to any division as mobile anti-tank guns. The guns were still in service when the Allies landed in Normandy in June 1944. The 4.7cm Panzeratv Kanonen, or Pak 36T, was the German name for the Czech 4.7cm KPUV Model 38 anti-tank gun. I also have some designation issues here, as Wiki indicates this was called the Pak 38T, which I find somewhat odd. I'm uncertain if this weapon was supplied with any significant numbers of APC rounds, but the round was available in April 1941. There were two versions of this weapon, the early version shown here and the later version shown previously. The barrel had the unique feature of being able to swing 180 degrees so that the barrel lay flat over the tail for transport, and the outer part of the trails could be folded inward to reduce its size. I suspect the designation could be, or the issue I have with designation could be related to this. The early version, which is really basically the Czech gun with minimal modification, may have had a particular designation, although I still find it hard to believe it would have been called 38T. And of course the latter modified version, where the Germans added pneumatic tyres to the gun, may have had a different designation, but this is purely guesswork. And actually, typically when the carriage differs from the gun, the German designation was generally two numbers with a slash in between, so I suspect my guess is completely wrong. The 5cm Panzeratv Kanonen 38, or Pak 38 L60, was a German anti-tank gun of 50mm caliber. After the Spanish Civil War, the Germans' authorities started to think that a new anti-tank gun would be needed, even though the 3.7cm Pak 36 had proven to be very successful. They asked Rheinmetall Bosch to produce a new and more capable anti-tank gun. They first designed the Pak 37 in 1935, but the German authorities did not approve it because of its low capabilities. Rheinmetall were forced to create a new gun under the designation of Pak 38, which fitted a new and longer L60 barrel and was approved for mass production in 1939. The Pak 38 was first used by the German forces during the Second World War in April 1941. When the Germans faced Soviet tanks in 1941 during Operation Barbarossa, the Pak 38 was one of the few early guns capable of penetrating the 45mm sloped armour of the T-34 hull at close range. The APCR round gave it significant additional penetration, allowing it to be taking on the modern Russian tanks in 1941 and 1942, particularly the KV-1, which the Germans seemed to fear greatly in 1941. The most famous of all German anti-tank guns was the 7.5cm Panzerlatvia Kanonen 40, or Pak 40. Development of the Pak 40 began after reports of new Soviet tank designs began to reach Berlin in 1939. The 5cm Pak 38 was still in testing at this point, but it appeared it would not be powerful enough to deal with these newer designs. Thus, the Panzeratvia Kanonen 40. The project was initially given low priority, but following the invasion of the USSR in 1941 and the appearance of heavily armoured Soviet tanks such as the T-34 and KV-1, it was given an increased priority. The first pre-production guns were delivered in November 1941. In April 1942, the Wehrmacht had 44 guns in service. By 1943, the Pak 40 formed the bulk of German anti-tank artillery. The 7.5cm Panzeratvia Kanonen 41 was one of the last German anti-tank guns brought into service and used in World War II, and notable for being one of the largest anti-tank guns to rely on the Gewicht principle. When first introduced, the 7.5cm Pak 41's performance would seem to indicate that it would supplant the Pak 40 as the standard issued anti-tank gun for the Wehrmacht. However, the emergent shell velocity tended to drop dramatically over long range and accuracy, and penetration suffered as a consequence. This factor, along with the growing shortage of tungsten, which was needed for the gun's special ammunition, would ensure that only 150 Pak 41s would ever be produced. The Pak 42, if that's exactly what it was called, was an anti-tank gun based on the Pak 40 but using the L70 gun barrel, similar to the one on the Panther. As a result, it combined Pak 40's low silhouette and high mobility and fairly good penetration power. However, I suspect this gun never actually existed. The weapon itself was called the 7.5cm Kampfwagen Kanonen 42 L70, and this seemed to imply that it was not actually attached to a anti-tank gun chassis. In fact, it was to be mounted within a tank. Historically, this gun was installed on the Panzer IV and Panther tank, but there isn't any good sources mentioning that there were any towable versions of the gun. The one source I found indicated 253 produced, but this is highly suspect. I suspect the 253 number represented a type of barrel that maybe was intended to be placed onto a Pak 40 chassis, and then they changed their mind, which is probably very likely, considering an L70 on a Pak 40 chassis would make this a rather unwieldy weapon. The Panzeratvia Kanonen 97/38, 7.5cm, was a combination of the barrel from the French Canon der 75 model 1897 fitted with the Swiss Solothurn muzzle brake and mounted on the carriage of the German 5cm Pak 30, and could fire captured French and Polish ammunition. However, in practice, the primary ammunition used was heat. 2,854 pieces were delivered in 1942 and 858 more the following in 1943. The Pak 97/38 reached the battlefield in the summer of 1942. Despite moderate effectiveness and a violent recall, it remained in service until the end of the war. The scale of its use can be illustrated by the ammunition used: 37,800 heat shells in 42, 371,000 in 1943, and on the 1st of March 1945, the Wehrmacht possessed 145 Pak 97/38s and FK-231s. The FK, or Field Kanonen, were the field guns, although only 14 were employed by frontline units. The reason why this weapon tended to be fairly important was that when the Germans decided they needed a 7.5cm anti-tank weapon, they went obviously with the Pak 40. However, Pak 40 production could not be ramped up quickly enough, and this was one of the weapons that was used to fill the gap, and it filled it reasonably well. The Panzeratvia Kanonen 36R was based on the Soviet 76mm divisional gun M1936, or F-22. The Pak 36R saw combat on the Eastern Front and in North Africa. The gun was actively used in both anti-tank and field artillery roles until the end of the war, although the field artillery version had a different designation and used a different chassis, so it could easily be identified. As late as March 1945, the Wehrmacht still possessed 165 Pak 36Rs and Pak 39Rs. The scale of its use can be illustrated by the amount of ammunition consumed: 49,000 AP and 8,000 subcaliber AP shells in 1942 and 151,000 in 1943. The Panzeratvia Kanonen 39R was based on the Soviet 76.2mm divisional gun Model 1939, or F-22 USW. Later in the war, the Soviet USV and ZIS-3 76mm divisional guns were also converted. There is a little bit of confusion about the designations of this weapon and the fact that I could barely find any photographs of it. What you see here is the FK, or Field Kanonen chassis, which allowed it to be used as a field gun, although it could also be used as an anti-tank weapon. However, as an anti-tank weapon, its silhouette was rather high. I've never found any specific pictures of the weapon. This is the closest I could find. However, I suspect this designation never really officially existed. Instead, it may have been an unofficial name used to differentiate the Model 36 from the Model 39 Russian 76.2mm gun. The picture here is, if it was in German service, was a FK, or Field Kanonen, rather than a Pak. The Panzeratvia Weffe 600, or POR 600, officially designated 8H63, was a lightweight anti-tank gun that used the high-low pressure system to fire hollow charge warheads. In 1945, it was used operationally by the Wehrmacht in small numbers. Only about 250 were produced before the war's end. Some 260 guns and 34,000 rounds of ammunition were completed from December 1941, with 81 guns delivered to the troops in January 1945 and 155 listed on 1st March 1945 rolls. Plans were called for the production of 1,000 guns and 4 million anti-tank and 800,000 explosive shells per month. It was a cheap, easy weapon to use, however the method of its projection gave it a very low range. But as you can see here, it's very small, low silhouette, very light, and as long as you could get close enough to the tank, quite effective. The 8.8cm Rocket in Waffe Puchen 43 was an 88mm caliber reusable anti-tank rocket launcher. The weapon was fired from a small two-wheeled gun carriage which fired a percussion-primed, rocket-propelled, fin-stabilised grenade, Pzb grenade or GR4312 with a shaped charge warhead. Approximately 3,000 units were completed from 1943 to 1945. It was made in much smaller numbers than either the Panzeratv, which was based on the American bazooka rocket launcher, or the Panzerfaust, which was a disposable anti-tank recoilless rifle. This was partially because it was realised that a small hollow tube with an ignition system was all you needed to launch the 88mm rocket, rather than an elaborate miniature artillery piece with carriage and breech. Due to the carriage and better sights, the accuracy was better and the range more than double that of the Panzerschreck. The Panzerlatvia Canon 43 was the most powerful anti-tank gun of the Wehrmacht to see service in significant numbers. Originally designed to use a highly effective cruciform mount, delays in production of this mount caused this interim solution to be created, which used a more traditional carriage. The Panzerlatvia Canon 43/41 proved heavy and awkward to handle in the mud and snow of the Eastern Front, and gunners referred to the 43/41 as the barn door, a reference to the size and weight of the gun. Nevertheless, the improvised Pak 43/41 proved an effective substitute for the Pak 43 until sufficient numbers of the more complex cruciform mounts could be manufactured to replace it in service. The main version of the Pak 43, or the Panzerlatvia Canon 43, was based on a highly effective cruciform mount which offered a full 360-degree traverse and a much lower profile than the ubiquitous anti-aircraft 8.8cm Flak 37. There were 578 88mm packs in German Army service on the 1st of October 1944 and 829 Pak 43s on the 1st of January 1945. This carriage gave it significantly greater mobility and usability than the traditional carriage of the previous 43/41. The Pak 43 was initially developed around 1942 following observations about the use of the Flak 18 as an anti-tank gun in North Africa. Firstly, the weapon's anti-aircraft carriage gave it a particularly high profile and made it a target for ground troops and air attacks. And secondly, the transport methods required were quite cumbersome. To correct this, Krupps decided to build a weapon that kept the low-profile nature of other German anti-tank guns, such as the Pak 38, and turn it into an 88mm weapon that was effective as the Flak 18. The result of this was the creation of the Pak 43. And this was a beautiful weapon, but it was still really large, expensive to build, and when you're desperately trying to escape the Russian hordes, difficult to get out of position and run away with. Not satisfied with the enormous size of the Pak 43, the Germans decided to create the Pak 44, which was based on the 12.8cm gun. The choice of 128mm caliber was made because of the availability of tooling due to the use of this caliber for naval weapons. This was a very powerful anti-tank weapon, but was very heavy, very expensive, and difficult to move around. When the German army came across the Soviet 122mm field guns, they issued a requirement for a similar weapon. Mainly due to the range, the 122 had very impressive range, and unfortunately the poor old German 15cm field howitzer could not meet it. Anyway, development initially concentrated on a field gun known as the Canon K-44. However, once heavier Soviet tanks, such as the IS-2, started to appear, the design requirement was altered to include it in an anti-armour role. That covers all the anti-tank guns that were used by the German army. I'm sure there's some other minor weapons that I've missed, but I think I've pretty much covered everything that was used, and even some weapons that probably were never used. Now let's look at organisation, starting with the infantry division. The German infantry division had anti-tank guns in 3 locations: a company-sized formation attached to each infantry regiment, and 3 company-sized formations in the anti-tank battalion. These consisted of 12 weapons each, starting with the 3.7cm anti-tank guns, and by early 1943 moving to the 5cm and 7.5cm gun. Some sources indicate the 3.7cm remained in the infantry regiments until well into 1943. In addition, a 3-gun section was attached, a platoon was attached to the reconnaissance battalion, which was exclusively 3.7cm. In Russia, these formations slowly disappeared and were not in the August 1943 structure at all. In August 1943, there was a major reorganisation. No doubt many of these changes actually had occurred much earlier, and this just simply reflected the reality, but nonetheless, August 43 is the date where the new German infantry division structure was formed. In 1943, the reconnaissance battalion was gone, and the anti-tank gun companies were increasingly being armed with the 7.5cm anti-tank gun, as well as 5cm. In 1944, the number of anti-tank guns attached to the infantry regiments was reduced to 3, with the 5cm PaK-38 being reasonably common. I suspect this was due to a lack of guns to equip the new division, being formed in early to mid-1944. In the latter period, the Germans raised a very lightweight infantry division, which only possessed a single company of anti-tank guns. Finally, the Volksgrenadier division had their anti-tank company reduced to 9 guns each. Moving to the German motorized divisions, ranging between 1939 and 1942, the motorized divisions followed the infantry divisional structure in the main, except they only possessed 2 companies in each anti-tank battalion. In 1941, there was a change with the addition of a single anti-tank gun in the motorcycle reconnaissance battalion. The motorised divisions began to receive the 5cm reasonably early, and these, at least initially, were mixed in with the 3.7cm anti-tank guns. By 1942, most, if not all, of the anti-tank guns in the anti-tank battalions were 5cm. The 3.7cm, as with the infantry, remained with the infantry regiments until sufficient 5cm guns became available to replace them. In August 1943, there was a major reorganisation, and the motorised divisions became Panzer Grenadier formations, and there was a reasonable significant changes. Now, the 43, or August 43 structure represented pretty much the high water mark for anti-tank guns in these formations. Each regiment had a full company of 3.7cm anti-tank guns, as well as a support section of 3 guns, probably 5cm. In addition, each battalion had a section of 3 guns, again, probably 7.5 or 5cm. Now, it's quite possible the company of 3.7cm guns were basically placed there because they had lots of 3.7cm guns, and why not? Because it disappeared by early 1944. The anti-tank battalions had a company of anti-tank guns, and the armoured reconnaissance battalion had a section of 3 guns. Most would have been 7.5cm, although some 5cm anti-tanks could have been existing in these formations. In 1944, the number of guns were reduced dramatically. The regiments lost their anti-tank company, and the battalions lost their anti-tank sections. If an armoured reconnaissance battalion was present, it would have retained its guns, but many of these formations had also been removed from the Panzer Grenadier divisions. The Panzer divisions, as you'd expect, were well equipped with anti-tank guns. In 1939 to 1940, each motorised battalion had a section of 3 anti-tank guns, as did the motorcycle battalion and armoured reconnaissance battalion. The bulk of the guns were in the anti-tank battalion, which had 3 companies of 12 guns each. In 1941, the motorised battalions lost their anti-tank guns, as these were moved under the motorised regiment HQ, but otherwise the structure was identical. Makes sense. I mean, it would be more sensible to have all the guns under the regiment, and then the regiment could allocate accordingly. Some 5cm anti-tank guns were being issued in 41, and by 1942 each Panzer division had a reasonable amount of these guns. A quick observation: while this TONE implies the motorised regiments received the 5cm anti-tank gun first, I feel this is unlikely. In most armies, the newer weapons were issued to the specialist anti-tank battalions, which could then be allocated out as required. I feel this is probably more accurate than what you see here. On the other hand, the scenario shown here is not impossible, so my gut feel may be incorrect. Remember, the Germans had this wonderful concept of basically organising things in any particular way they wish, so placing the newer anti-tank guns in the regiment or Panzergrenadier regiments may have actually made sense. As with all other divisions, in August 1943, a major reorganisation affected the Panzer divisions. While the Panzergrenadier Regiment retained an AT section of 3 guns, the Panzergrenadier battalions now had a section of 3 guns allocated to them as well, which returned the structure back to the 1939-40, although in this case there was a saving of 3 guns, which may have been the real reason why this occurred. The motorcycle battalion has disappeared. In September 1944, the Panzer Division changed again, with a reduction in anti-tank gun strength. The anti-tank battalion, which was supposed to be fully self-propelled between August 43 to August 44, now replaced a self-propelled tank destroyer company with a towed gun company. I suspect many divisions were not really motorised even in this period, and you always had this mix of tank destroyers and towed guns, but nonetheless now it was made official. I'm a bit amazed the infantry now no longer have any anti-tank guns. On the other hand, they were equipped with anti-tank rocket launchers instead, so that may have been sufficient. A quick note about the structure of the anti-tank companies. Each anti-tank company of 12 guns consisted of 4 anti-tank platoons, each of which consisted of 3 guns. And this is pretty common throughout the entire structure of the German army. There is a couple of cases where lone 3.7cm anti-tank guns were allocated to Panzergrenadier regiments in some organisations. I'm not quite sure why this occurred, and the official structures that I'm showing here don't show that, but there are some TONEs which do show that. This completes my video on the subject of German anti-tank guns. I have no doubt I shall be updating this video in the future as I obtain new source material. I have posted some of the source material I've used in the URL shown in this image. Denken Sie daran, immer für Heil Heimatland zu kämpfen.